and Caleb said, no, it's indeed a great land. Yeah, there may be a giant or two there, but with God we can do it. With God we can conquer the land. But the people are so stirred up by the committee of 10 that they pick up stones to throw at Joshua and Caleb to kill them, to kill the messengers who say, we can do it. And only God's intervention saves Joshua and Caleb. God sends the pillar of cloud and separates Joshua and Caleb and Moses from the rest of the people, and they are saved. God says to Moses, that's it. I'm going to bring a plague and I'm going to wipe out the entire people right here, right now. I'm done. The desert will just simply be covered with the bodies of 1.5 million people. I'm done. Moses intercedes on behalf of the people and says, God, you don't want to do that. You know, what are the Egyptians going to say if all of us are killed at once? What are the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Philistines? What are they all going to say? They're going to say that you are a God with no power, that you didn't even have the power to save your people. So God relents and says, okay, they won't all die at once, but they will all die. He first brings a plague to the 10. The 10 are immediately just wiped out, they're gone. And then God says, only Joshua and Caleb of all the adults will enter into the promised land. He will spend the next 40 years, 1 year for every day that the spies were in Israel, wandering in the wilderness and dying. Every single one of you will die. I should have entitled this sermon Nearly Wasted Wilderness Years, because it wasn't completely wasted. It was indeed wasted for all of the adults who died. 500,000 of the 1.5 million people buried out in the wilderness. But during those 40 years, Joshua and Caleb take the young adults who are growing into young adulthood, teenagers who become men, the babies who were born and become teenagers and become men and women, and he creates an army. And during that time, God creates a people who will be holy and follow him into the promised land. I wonder if you've ever stood on the banks of the Jordan. Maybe not the real Jordan, but a spiritual Jordan. If you've ever stood on the banks and wondered whether or not you should cross, or whether you should stay in the wilderness, or maybe even join the Back to Egypt committee and get back to slavery. Have you ever stood on the banks of the Jordan? Well, if you have probably dealt with the things that caused Israel this terrible destruction. One of them is unbelief. Why do we have such unbelief in our lives? Well, part of it is because we go and search for the facts. The facts. I want you to go find out everything there is to find out about the land of Israel. Go bring me back the facts. Well, they bring them back the facts. It is indeed a wonderful land. It's too wonderful. The people who are there are going to fight to keep it, and it's going to be one hell of a battle. How in the world are we going to step across the Jordan and conquer this land? The fact is, or the facts are, that there were giants there. That the cities were indeed walled, that it was going to be an incredibly difficult fight. Facts almost always lead to fear. We can't face those giants. We can't break down those walls. We're just people. How are we going to fight? And And fears almost always lead to fantasies. You're just grasshoppers. We aren't strong enough, we're not brave enough, we're not faithful enough, we're not good enough, we don't have what it takes. But Joshua and Caleb said, with God we can do all things. So unbelief comes to us from facts, which lead to fear, which leads to fantasy, which leads to failure. We would rather wander in the wilderness than cross the Jordan. And this failure leads to open rebellion. The word that is used the most often to describe the Israelites at this time is murmuring. Isn't that a great word? Murmuring. It sounds like what it is, murmuring. Has there ever been any murmuring at Mount Olive Methodist Church? You don't have to answer that. You don't really have to. Murmuring. Fault finding. All kinds of trials and troubles and discontent. Grumbling. And then the denouement, the top of the pyramid. It's all God's fault. God led us here. If we hadn't been listening to God, we'd be safe in Egypt. Oh yeah, we might still be slaves, but it'd be better than being out here in the wilderness or having to cross the Jordan and fight. Oh my God. Why in the world did we listen to God? It's all God's fault. Which, of course, is the ultimate rebellion, isn't it? Rebellion is nothing in the world more than our thinking that we know more than God does and can do things better than God can do them. As I've said to you before, and will say to you many times, if I don't teach you anything else but this, I will have succeeded. God is God. You are not. And I am not. God is God. There is ultimate belief and rebellion and flat-out disobedience. Is wasted wilderness years. I believe that the United Methodist Church has been in a wilderness for almost 40 years. In 1976, the church began to decline. And since 1976, the United Methodist Church has lost 12 million members. What's happened? We've been wandering in the wilderness. God has asked us if we are willing to cross the Jordan on a brand new adventure. It's going to be a difficult one, an incredibly difficult one. It was one of the most heart-wrenching weeks of my life this week when I had to make a decision. Am I going to relinquish my credentials, relinquish my membership in the United Methodist Church, and become whatever? Or am I going to hold on? I've been a United Methodist pastor for almost 50 years. But I made the decision this week to surrender and to remove my membership. But I don't want our votes, whatever our vote may be, to be a negative thing. I want us to see if there's some way that we can make a positive vote. A vote that would say, yes, we're going to cross the Jordan. Yes, we're going to enter into a new day. A day in which God's grace and God's power and God's mercy and God's love can work anew in us. A day in which God can bless us. I want to fast forward 40 years. Joshua is ready to lead the people into the promised land. Moses has died. They're ready to step across the Jordan. 4 times in the first chapter of the book of Joshua, God says something incredibly important to Joshua. Anybody know what it is? But he says 4 times in the first chapter, be very courageous, Joshua. Be very courageous. It's going to take courage. It's going to be hard, but I will be with you. But think about how difficult it must have been to take that first step into the Jordan. God not only leads them to the Jordan, but he leads them to the Jordan at the time of the spring flooding, when the river is at its widest part, and when its water is running the fastest. That's when he tells them to cross. The priests have the Ark of the Covenant, and when the very first priest steps his foot into the water backs up. The flowing Jordan stops and backs up. And it's just like the crossing of the Sinai. There's a wall of water backed up, and the river's flowing backwards. And before this wall of water, there is dry land. And across the dry land, there are stones for the people to step across, that they might enter into the promised land. But oh, that first step took tremendous courage. And there were other steps of courage that it took. You think it took some courage to fight Jericho, the greatest walled city of all? God says, I'm going to give you a great battle plan, Joshua. It's a great plan. He tells them the plan. It's the dumbest plan you've ever heard of. It doesn't make any sense at all. We're going to defeat the greatest city in the world by marching around. Shout. What? What a leader Joshua must have been, because he convinces the people to give it a try. And a great miracle occurs. God defeats Jericho. And I believe that God will defeat all the Jerichos that are before us as well. All of us have a choice to make. Will we cross the Jordan, or will we wander in the wilderness? As Joshua says at the very end of his book, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Amen? Amen. As we sing our final hymn today, I want you in your mind to begin to ponder, what will I do? What step will I take? Remember verse 28, which said, God says, I will do for you the very thing you demand. If you demand that you want to spend the rest of your life wandering, God will let you do it. If you want to go back to Egypt, God will help you. If you want to go back into slavery, God will allow that as well. If you want to cross the spiritual Jordan and into a new land, God will be with you and lead the way. But God will do whatever you demand. So as we sing, I invite you and I encourage you and ask you to begin to very prayerfully decide what you will do. Let's stand and join in the singing of the hymn, On Jordan's Stormy Banks I Stand.
I am bound for the promised land. May the God of grace, the God of hope, the God of peace, and the God of joy go with you throughout this day and all the days